Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism. But the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more.
Bernie Sanders has gone from warning about the oligarchy to openly championing full-blown socialism, and Bill Maher is having none of it. The razor-tongued comedian calls out Sanders' hypocrisy point-blank, reminding him that his own fortune was built through the very capitalist system he now condemns. It's blunt, unapologetic, and a scorching takedown of Sanders' socialist sermon. Let's get straight into it.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Maher highlights a truth that too many people overlook. Bernie Sanders, AOC, and other progressive figures often paint themselves as harmless social democrats, but their policies edge far closer to full-blown socialism. For those confused about the difference, here's the simple breakdown. Social democrats support capitalism with strong safety nets, letting markets drive the economy while the government ensures fairness and protects the vulnerable. Socialists, on the other hand, go much further, pushing for major industries to be publicly owned or tightly controlled by the state, effectively shifting power away from private enterprise. That distinction matters, and Maher doesn't hesitate to call it out.
Again, this is against why people sometimes, I think, question some of what you're saying. This is a survey, student loan forgiveness recipients. 73% of applicants say they are likely to spend their extra money on non-essential, including vacations, smartphone, drugs, and alcohol. They admitted that to the pollster.
Who is this pollster?
NBC News. 52% they are very likely to buy new clothing. 46% they would use the money for vacation and eat out at restaurants. This is why people have a thing about, I would never call it free money, like I said just did.
That right there is the true American spirit. Most Americans reject the idea of drifting toward a heavily controlled socialist system, where the government dictates essentials like food or basic needs. They value choice, freedom, and the chance to build something for themselves. Even with capitalism's flaws, as the polls Maher cites make crystal clear, most still prefer it over a heavy-handed government alternative. People want reform, not control, improvement, not replacement. That's why Sanders and his allies are likely to fall short. Their vision may sound noble in speeches, but everyday Americans instinctively reject the reality it creates. People know what happens when governments start dictating everything, and they're not about to trade their freedom for rigid ideological experiments.
We just increased military spending with very little discussion, I don't know if you know this, by $80 billion. Military industrial complex.
Including the Democrats.
Pardon me?
The Democrats vote for it too.
Yes, absolutely correct. Absolutely right. All right.
But that's socialism, the military. That's crony socialism.
Well, that's
right.
Crony capitalism.
But the military isn't capitalism. That's the government.
No, but it's who owns the military industrial complexes. All right. But anyhow.
Right.
All right. So when you talk about giveaways, you have major corporations in this country that make billions in profit, don't pay a nickel in taxes. Billionaires have an effective tax rate lower than that of a truck driver or a nurse. You have a generation, you talk about this younger generation right now. I got around the country and I talked to a lot of people. You know, I don't know anything about that poll, but I can tell you, I've talked to nurses who are working their asses off, doing the right thing. They leave school $70,000 in that. They can't afford now to get married and have children.
Yes, but sprinting headfirst into full-blown socialism isn't the answer. Maher is right. Bernie Sanders' critiques are real. The issues he points to, rising costs, corporate greed, and the financial pressure on young people, are genuine excesses of capitalism. But fixing them doesn't mean tearing the whole system down. Take student loan debt, for example. Blanket forgiveness might sound appealing, but it shifts the burden onto taxpayers who never went to college. A smarter approach tackles the system at its root. Cap tuition increases, expand income-based repayments so graduates pay according to what they earn, and offer tax credits to employers who help pay off employee loans. This keeps accountability intact, eases the burden on students, pressures colleges to lower costs, and, most importantly, avoids unnecessary radical experiments.
I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism. But the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more.
Maher continues to warn fellow Democrats about the risks of giving real power to figures like Sanders and Manny. He points out that America already has programs with socialist roots, Social Security, Medicare, and public education, that cushion economic hardship without dismantling capitalism. These safety nets exist to support people, not replace the private sector. But Maher stresses that the new wave of self-styled social democrats isn't satisfied with that balance. They're pushing for a far more radical shift toward full-blown socialism, with sweeping government control and policies that could weaken the nation's ability to protect its own interests. That includes advocating for more lenient border rules, which critics argue could compromise basic security. For Maher, this isn't idealism, it's a reckless experiment with the country's stability.
Going to win an election on that? This just seems like more extremism at a time when Americans are begging both parties, please, could just one of you act normal? It's either defund the police or military in the streets. Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods.
Maher delivers a blunt, unapologetic warning to the DNC. Keep chasing ideological fads, and you may not see power again anytime soon. Socialism, he argues, is just the latest obsession. The party seems trapped in a cycle of following whatever shiny idea dominates activist circles. Last election it was wokeness, which alienated moderates and independents. Today, it's socialism pushed aggressively by the party's loudest voices. Meanwhile, everyday Americans are growing frustrated with rising costs, weak borders, and cultural overreach. Instead of focusing on practical governance, Maher says, the DNC keeps drifting into political fantasies that appeal to Twitter activists but repel the voters they actually need. Keep heading down this path, he warns, and they shouldn't be surprised when elections they could have easily won slip away.
Governor-elect Spanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal! You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in 2025. Yeah, no one wants to do that again.
Maher argues that the Democratic Party won't win another major election until it returns to what he calls basic political normalcy. Voters, he stresses, are exhausted by constant ideological swings, cultural crusades, and performative politics. And he's not alone. Many longtime DNC insiders share the same concern. The party has drifted too far into symbolic battles and activist fantasies, instead of delivering grounded, practical solutions. Maher insists it's past time for the DNC to abandon its flirtation with extremist policies and refocus on issues that truly impact people's lives. Affordable living, border security, economic stability, public safety, and functional governance. In these areas, real results speak louder than rhetoric. Until the party chooses substance over spectacle, Marr believes it will continue to alienate moderate voters and lose elections it should be winning.
These Democratic Socialists at another of their conventions, they were told to make jazz hands instead of clapping, lest some delegates suffer sensory overload. And also, and I'm not joking, they were told not to be wearing, any aggressive scents.
Please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? Because that's going to be difficult for people.
Oh, this. Really? This is who the Democrats are thinking of following. Chuck Schumer ain't perfect, but at least he doesn't crumple into a heap when confronted with Chanel number 5. You may now clap in the traditional way.
This new breed of socialist Democrats feels less like a political movement and more like a fusion of woke culture and hard-left economics. Seriously, who else replaces normal applause with awkward jazzy hands or whatever that's called now? It's performative sensitivity, not serious politics. Even their stylistic choices seem intentionally symbolic, signaling ideological purity over professionalism. When wokeness and socialism merge, everything becomes a gesture, and everyone tiptoes around imaginary offenses. Confidence, competence, clarity, gone. What's left is constant self-censorship, walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting anyone, anywhere, for any reason. It's exhausting, it's unserious, and it's exactly why so many voters are rolling their eyes at the whole thing.
When FDR was president, when Truman was president, even when JFK was president, you go out on the street and you say to people, which party represents the working class of America? Most people, I think, agree, would have said the Democratic Party.
Correct.
All right. Today, you go out on the street, and that is not the sentiment. In fact, the Republican Party probably has more adherents than the Democrats.
How did that happen?
I'll tell you how it happened. It happened because 30 years ago, the Democrats said, hey, Republicans are getting all this corporate money. We want it too. Let's go out and get it. And let's forget about the people who are working 50 or 60 hours a week. So you're sitting out there somewhere in the Midwest. You can't afford health care. Maybe your job went to China and you're earning half of what you used to make. Your kid can't afford to go to college.
The reason people are gravitating toward the Republican Party goes much deeper than it seems. Democrats have drifted so far into wokeness that they've lost sight of the issues that actually matter to everyday Americans. Instead of focusing on the working class, the backbone of their traditional base, they've become consumed with symbolic battles, identity debates, and fringe cultural obsessions that don't improve people's lives. In the process, they've abandoned the very voters who once relied on them. Workers struggling with rising costs, families trying to stay afloat, and communities frustrated with crime, weak borders, and failing public services. Rather than addressing these concerns head-on, the party chases applause from small activist circles on social media, mistaking online cheers for real political momentum. That's why voters are shifting, not because Republicans are perfect, but because Democrats stopped offering focus, practicality, and common sense. When a party prioritizes the periphery over its core, the core eventually walks away.
Restore hope to the American people. Working class are the majority of people in this country. They are hurting. After 50 years of exploding technology, they're earning less than they did before. All right?
You sound like you're running again. No? Third time?
I'm just talking about the book here.
Third time the charm? People usually write a book when they're about to run.
Well, no.
That's true, Bernie. Many of the issues you highlight are real, and ordinary Americans are feeling pressure from every direction. But the solution isn't swinging hard into wokeness or embracing full-blown socialism. In fact, combining the two would only deepen the country's struggles. Wokeness turns every discussion into a cultural minefield, where people are afraid to speak honestly. Socialism, meanwhile, concentrates power in the state's hands, stifling innovation and limiting the freedoms that have driven America's progress for generations. Together, they create a system where symbolism replaces solutions and ideological purity outweighs practical governance. Instead of addressing rising costs, spiraling student debt, and a shrinking middle class, these approaches bog the nation down in endless cultural policing and economic stagnation. Americans don't want a society where the government dictates their choices or where they must tiptoe around ideological sensitivities. They want real, workable solutions, policies that strengthen the economy, protect freedoms, and support working families. Woke socialism offers none of that. Maher's warning is clear. America needs practical solutions, not ideological experiments. Wokeness and socialism may sound appealing to some, but they risk alienating everyday voters and undermining the freedoms that define the nation. The Democratic Party must refocus on policies that actually improve people's lives, jobs, security, education, and economic stability, rather than chasing symbolic battles. Until they do, the working class will continue drifting toward alternatives that prioritize substance over spectacle, leaving the party's electoral future uncertain. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.